we're going to be making a clay tic-tac-toe board. The first thing we're going to do is make our board. You're going to get a slab of clay and a square piece of paper. You want to make sure that your slab is big enough for that square piece of paper, and then before we cut it out, we're going to add some textures and some details to that board. I'm going to use one of my tools that's in my basket to add kind of a bumpy texture. It's rounded, so I can just press down gently and make that bumpy texture. But we have some different rollers that will give textures and lots of different tools that you can make that texture with. I'm going to cover the whole thing, and then once I do that, then I will use one of my cutting tools to actually cut the square the right size. After I cut my slab into the right size of square, I can take the paper off, and I'm actually going to use a tiny bit of water on the end of my finger, and I'm going to smooth out that edge so we don't have any sharp edges and all the edges are smooth. I'm going to also flip it over and do the same thing on the other side, smoothing out my edges with just a little bit of water. And while I have it flipped over, I'm also going to put my name on the back with a toothpick. I want to make sure when I write my name on the back of my clay that I don't press too hard, because I don't want to make any holes in my clay. So I've smoothed out the edges, and I'm taking a toothpick to neatly write my name on the back. The next part we're ready for is to make some coils and actually divide our board up into 9 different little squares that we can play our tic-tac-toe on. I'm going to make some little marks just on the edge that I can easily fix if I decide it's not measured right. I'm going to just use my tool and try to make sure all my squares are about the same size. It doesn't have to be super perfect, but I'm going to try and make it as even as I can. Using my tool to measure, you would end up needing 2 little marks on each square, and then that will help divide it into the 9 squares that we will need. I'm going to make a tiny little score mark where my line's going to be, and that's actually where we're going to add some coils to make and divide up our board. The next thing I'm going to do is take some of my scrap clay and make some coils. I want to make them long enough so that they fit on the board, but I also want to try to make them even. We're going to need 4 coils, and I'm going to try and make them as even and as the same width as possible. And that's what we'll attach on top of our board to make our dividers, and not just the score marks that we've made. So the divider in between the board pieces will actually be raised up off of our board. Now that I've got my coils made, it's time to attach them to our board. I need to score and slip my coils and my board together. So I'm going to take a toothpick and rough up the edge of one side of my coil. I'm doing this gently so that way I don't squish my coil too much. I'm going to do it on all my coils and then on my board where I drew those lines where it will be divided. Once I've got everything scored, then I can take my finger and dip a little bit of water in it, and I can attach my coils to my board. Adding the water is what we call slip. So I'm going to put a little bit of water on both my coil and my board, and I'm going to kind of pinch it down and smooth it out a little bit. I'm going to end up with a little extra clay hanging off the edge, but that's okay. I'll trim it off later. So as I'm smoothing it out, I'm kind of pushing it down just a little bit into the board. Then I can trim off my extra clay. I'm going to do the same thing with the two pieces that are perpendicular, but I'm going to do it kind of in 3 smaller chunks. So I'm actually going to end up cutting my pieces and attaching them that way, and smooth them out, push them down into the board just a little bit. After I've got all my coils on and I've got my board divided into my 9 squares, I'm going to take just a little bit of water on the end of my finger and smooth out my coils. I mostly want to get rid of the creases from where my coils attach to each other. So I can use just a little bit of water and my fingertips to smooth those out and make them even. Once I've smoothed out my coils and any edges or any final touch-ups I need for my clay board, then we're going to set it aside, let it dry, and be ready to be fired. We will glaze these another day, and then we will be on and starting our clay pieces for our tic-tac-toe board. Now that we've gotten our tic-tac-toe board made and ready to be fired, we're going to make our pieces. We want to make 6 pieces of 2 different styles to match with the theme of our tic-tac-toe board. I've got a small slab of clay, and I'm going to start by using my texture tools and any of the random things I find in my basket that we can use to make designs and textures with clay. I'm going to use that inside of a tape dispenser, a marker, and my toothpick to make a circle with a bunch of rounds in it. After I cut them out, then I'm going to actually cut them in half, and then I will have some rainbow pieces to work with. While I'm doing my little textures and designs, I'm not pushing all the way through the clay. It's just on the surface. I will actually cut out the round shape of the outside circle so that way I can turn those into my rainbows, and then I will cut them in half as well, and then use a little bit of water to smooth out the edges. I've got my rainbow pieces, and the next pieces I want to go for my rainbow themed tic-tac-toe board is I want to make some clouds. I'm going to use the rest of my slab of clay, and I want to make some textures on it, like fluffy cloud texture. So I'm using that marker lid, and I'm adding those circles all over to give kind of a fluffy cloud texture to it. And then I'm going to take my cutting tool, and I'm going to cut out my cloud shapes. I want 6 cloud pieces. I want 6 of each of my shapes. That way you have a few extra to work with when you're playing. After I've cut out all of my cloud shapes, then I want to take a little bit of water on my fingertip and smooth out the edges. When we cut clay out, it sometimes makes the edges a little rough and bumpy. We want to smooth those out because after the clay is dried and fired, those rough, bumpy edges could actually become really sharp. So we want to make sure that the edges are nice and smooth and ready to be played with. Now once I've got all of my tic-tac-toe pieces done and all the edges smoothed out, I want to take my toothpick and I want to put my initials on the back of each piece. I will try to keep your pieces separated and sorted while they're in the kiln, but this will help just in case there's any mix-up or confusion. So use a toothpick and write your initials on the back of each piece. When that's all done, we will set them aside and we will fire them and be ready to glaze them in a few weeks.